Hi everyone, and welcome to my Organisational Improvement Plan presentation. This has been framed from my 10-page summary, and I'll also aim to justify my reasoning for choosing particular models, frames, solutions and leadership approaches, and also share my key learning moments during the writing of my Organisational Improvement Plan with respect to myself as a leader and as a scholar practitioner. This initial slide captures the key words that have emerged as significant terms of reference throughout my Organisational Improvement Plan. And that green word in the centre, tri-analogous, is actually the leadership approach that's been created for the purpose of this plan. But that key word underneath, interdependence, is a theme that's continuously emerged throughout my Organisational Improvement Plan, and hopefully you'll hear that as I go through this presentation. This slide just gives an overview of the aim, change catalyst, the model and frame that I'm using throughout this Organisational Improvement Plan, the emergent theme as I've just intimated, and then the leadership approach and solution. So the aim is to enhance team motivation through a period of rapid change, and I'll explain more about that when I talk about the problem of practice very soon. The change catalyst was actually the governing board moving our core professional learning and development department into a separate business entity, a training institute, and we were pushed towards a new commercial vision and aims and targets. The model and frame that I've actually used to analyse and also drive the solution and leadership approaches has been the Nadler and Tushman 1980 congruence model and the human resource frame by Bowman and Deal in 2013. Both of these kind of initiated that theme of interdependence, and then that kind of flowed into the leadership approach, tri-analogous leadership, where there's an interdependence of transformational, distributed and servant leadership, and the actual interdependence of three solutions of collaboration, collective understanding of individual expertise and drivers, and team building. And I'll explain all of these as I go through this presentation. It's organised into 3 chapters as per the full Organisational Improvement Plan. So I'm going to begin with chapter 1, which basically outlines the problem of practice and the context in which the problem resides. So the problem of practice central to this Organisational Improvement Plan asks, how can team motivation be enhanced whilst going through a period of rapid change and transition from one operational style, service orientation, to another operational style, commercial orientation. Before I discuss the factors that actually affect the problem, I'm going to aim to describe the context for you. So I operate within a perceived neoliberal context, both in terms of the organisation and the wider environment and country outside of that. I operate within an international for-profit private organisation that owns 52 schools within the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. We are a new training institute focusing on teacher learning and leadership. We were previously a core professional learning and development department, and we were based within the corporate organisation. About 24 months ago, the governing board moved us into a separate business entity, a training institute, and we now have a new commercial vision. So you can see from this diagram here, the 2 arrows represent the transition from current or previous state, as the case may be now, into a future state, which we are still pushing and driving towards. So we were an internal PLD department, we were a cost centre with a specific budget, and we provided a service to the schools. And although we provide a service now, the service now comes with a cost because we're now a profit centre with commercial orientation. And even though it had a cost before, it was kind of held within a central budget, whereas now we actually charge, or we're starting to charge for our products and services. So that entire change and transition is happening as we speak. Now, what was interesting for me, particularly thinking about the problem of practice and linking it to the context, if I go back to course 2, that was a real significant turning point for me in terms of this Organisational Improvement Plan, because that was when I really started to define what my problem of practice was. So really thinking about those lenses that we look through or operate within. So the outside context is very neoliberal. It's very marketized. We are responsible to perform. All of our schools are inspected on a yearly basis, and these are reported on on a yearly basis as well. So there's a real level of performance and push for performance. We then have the organisation, and the leaders within that are very conservative, as in they are very command and control, which I'll come on to a little bit later. But then within our team, we were very, and still are to a certain extent, very liberal. So that kind of trichotomy for me was very interesting to really think about whether my own values and ways of working resonated with that of the organisation and the country that we're in, or can those things actually exist together so that regardless of my personal lens, particular leadership approaches or solutions can still be applied and used in practice. So this is what I'm aiming to kind of overcome as I go through this organisational plan. But that course 2 for me was really, really significant. Thinking of that transition and that movement of the arrows actually developed into a metaphor. And the team actually symbolises a fast-moving train and a continuously changing scenery that's representative of the wider organisational and environmental context. Now, interestingly, this picture is actually taken from the UAE and from Dubai a few years ago now. It looks slightly different now. But you can see the fast-moving train, which technically are us, the Institute team, and we're moving at speed, maintaining that speed as we continuously change, but also continuously provide products and services. None of that has stopped. And the scenery around us, as you can see within that image, it's constantly being built as we go. As we move, it keeps changing, it keeps adjusting. And that's kind of how that metaphor has developed. So those factors that are influencing change really stem from the external organisation and potential parts of the environment that move into that, and then also the internal factors within the core team. The external factors really stem from the governing board. So they seek feedback from principals, corporate leaders, and anyone else in that higher level positional leadership regarding training, but they don't get feedback from the Institute team. Therefore, we feel quite marginalised, our voices are not being heard. And similarly, the value and worth of professional learning and development, particularly throughout that change, was being regularly questioned or evaluated in terms of what was going to move into the training institute. So a lot of value exercises came about which scrutinised current practices and really appeared, and this is how it felt within the core team, just from speaking with the team, question the trustworthiness and then start to create cynicism because they felt frustrated, so their voices weren't heard. The work that had previously been done was being called into question, so it became very fluid and it felt uneasy. And as a result of that governing board making the decision to move the team, we were subject to a command and control culture, as Gutek in 1997 posit. As a result, some members of our team actually started taking steps to ensure that they protected themselves unilaterally. They presented themselves with personal power and made sure that the work they were doing was celebrated in some way to particular leaders. So they were pushing themselves forward, not really thinking about the team. So the team started to disband. And then another factor that exacerbated that team disbandment was the fact that the team had grown 300% to a team of 16. So it went from a really small core team to a larger team of 16. But within that time, that team growth, there was also a team turnover of 30%. So there were people moving out and even more new people coming in. So due to that, we were hiring specialist team members, but they tended to work in silos and more unilateral, which created more frustration for those team members who were working in a more generalist and collaborative approach. So that created internal team tensions and really started to affect motivation. So then it really required a leadership approach. Now, really going through those external and internal factors really made me start to think about how it really is affecting us. So the use of particular models, and I use the Nadler and Tushman congruence model, which I'm going to explain now. I had looked at other models, but this one really resonated because it had the inputs and the outputs, which were being kind of command and control enforced onto us. But what was really key for me, it had a core, and the core, as I see it, is the Institute team, and we need to be congruent with each other. So looking at this image now, we have the train image, so it's kind of representative of the metaphor, but I've really integrated it into the Nadler and Tushman model. So we have the congruence in the middle, surrounded by trust, flexibility, adaptability. But then the real key components of what I perceive as the team, we've got the performance, so we have particular goals that we need to meet and particular work that we need to do. Within the team, we have formal structures and processes, predominantly coming from the wider organisation in terms of policies, etc., and they're influencing our practice, and then we start to create our own. Creating our own predominantly through informal structures and processes, but ultimately it's about the people, and the people themselves through the human resource frame. So as I said, that kind of push, there's almost a pushing the train, and that, as I see, is the environmental factors. So things such as the environmental changes, as in federal implementation of teacher licensing across the UAE, short-term performance goals, so as I said before, all of our schools being inspected yearly, actually influences our practices, and it feeds into the strategy within our organisation. So really thinking about us as a training institute across the UAE, not just within the organisation, really enhances our commercial positioning in the country. But then obviously the sandwiching between the external factors that I've previously explained and the internal factors start to put real pressure into our train and start to kind of create that disbandment and lack of motivation, and in some cases cynicism. But we're still moving, and we still have a vision that we need to achieve, and you can see kind of that direction in the arrow of achieving vision. So we've got two goals really, and predominantly from my perspective, the first goal is really about that interdependent team and improving motivation, whereas the next goal is really to be profitable by year 3. And that's kind of the commercial goal. That's not really a focus of this organisational improvement plan, because until year 3, I'm not going to be able to prove or disprove that. But if we can get the motivation piece right and the team operating in an effective way, then hopefully that commercial goal will be achieved. And this is where the red area comes about. And this is where the solutions and leadership approaches are really key. As a protective shield almost, in the red area around that train, how we as leaders, or myself as the leader in this case in the organisational improvement plan, affect the congruence within the middle and really harness the people. Because it was through this model and the use of this model that the theme of interdependence really emerged. And even when I was writing chapter 2 and analysing the organisation to a deeper level, it made me realise and appreciate the depth of organisations and their complexities within that. So even looking at those 4 areas, the people, the performance, the structures and procedures, processes, it's important that those elements actually work interdependently and that there is congruence. Because at the moment, with those external factors and the internal factors, that congruence is not happening. The performance piece isn't working very well because people feel demotivated. Everything is going through a value exercise, was going through a value exercise where people were just feeling, well, what's the point in doing the work that I'm doing? Because we were moving from a core department into an actual training institute, structures and procedures were starting to move and shift because our focus had to move and shift. But really, as I started to understand and analyse this to that depth, and really understand the complexity at the core of all of this, regardless of the positional power from the external, the personal power from the internal and the political piece that was happening. I was looking at the political frame from Borman and Deal initially as my